Europe represents 32% of the world market in this case, so just slightly over America. Both Europe and North America, they have had a quite moderate year in 2008, so growth around 3%. Other areas like Asia Pacific or the rest of the world, they are growing in 2 digits still. So from this 32% of Europe, Germany, UK, and France still account for the biggest part of the market, although the growth trends vary quite a lot, so we will see it afterwards. So Italy follows, and Spain is currently the fifth, as I said. But most of the analysts agree that Spain will overtake Italy by 2012. So focusing specifically on ICT in Spain, we are speaking of a market of 102 billion euros. So Javier mentioned before another fact. I mean, he was speaking of 114 billion euros. That's the internal data we have. But whenever we want to compare, we normally use this one. So if instead of turnover, we are speaking of the value added by the sector, we are normally speaking of 5.9% of Spanish GDP. But if we add to this the indirect effects and the induced effects, last year we will be speaking of around 22.5% of the Spanish GDP. So the impact of this market has to be seen not just as an individual market, but it has to be seen also the effect it has on other markets. So as in almost any mature economy, telecom services still account for the biggest part of the market, although this part is growing in volume. As prices keep dropping down, the growth is not that strong. It's followed by information technologies, and here growth in Spain has been very, very remarkable, both in services and outsourcing, not that much in hardware. And digital content, which is something that in Europe is not still measured quite well. In Spain, we are starting to be the hub for the production of digital content for the Spanish-speaking countries. So it's becoming a very, very interesting subsector. On the other hand of the coin, we have all activities related to hardware manufacturing or electronic consumers. As Javier has already said, these activities are shifting slowly to other cheaper countries, especially those activities focus more on manufacturing. So if we see the evolution of this market in Spain, we see that in the last 6 years, the growth has been around 44.3%, which is around 6.3 average growth rate per year. So in spite of a not that strong year in 2008, the market is still growing. We expect that 2009 will be also a year with moderate growth, because especially of the telco industry, but IT systems will keep growing strong. So 2 main points here. It has been growing really, really strong and stronger than in the European economy. If you remember, Germany, France, UK, and Italy, all of them are growing at a very, very slower rates than in Spain. But most analysts agree that in the next years, this trend will follow or continue. So we expect to close the gap with the biggest economies here. So if we take a look at the market, we have currently over 28,000 ICT companies operating in Spain. But here again, I mean, you have to take into account that Spain is a country of SMEs. So a big share of these companies are small or medium-sized companies, meaning that they have less than 250 workers. So overall, they have 415,000 workers, direct workers in the sector. If we take into account not just the direct employment, but also indirect employment, we'll be speaking of around 1.5 million workers, which is around 7.5% of the Spanish active population. So if we see the distribution of in regions, which is quite small, Madrid, Barcelona, or Catalonia, Valencia, and Andalucía account for around 70% of the companies in the sector. But this doesn't mean that other companies are successfully established in other areas. And in fact, with the new infrastructures, other areas are pushing very, very strong in the sector. So just also a small quote on a report by IBM from 2007. Spain was the second country in Europe in terms of employment created by foreign investment in Spain and in ICT. And this was mainly because of the establishment of a lot of software factories that year in Spain. We'll see some facts on that afterwards. So as Javier said, I mean, no matter if we are speaking of software vendors, hardware vendors, service providers, telco providers, most of the Western players are already in Spain, and they are not just in Spain selling, they are in Spain doing pretty interesting activities. We are now welcoming a lot of Asian players. So Huawei came a couple of years ago to Malaga and Madrid, and other Asian service providers are looking eagerly to Spain because they want to use it to get to, especially to other European clients they have in the UK and Germany, taking advantage of some of the cost advantages from Spain. So not only we have multinationals here, but Spanish multinationals are starting to be known outside. So companies like Telefónica, Indra, or Telvent are starting to get a name outside our markets. And it's a pity for us, but it's, most of the breakthroughs these companies are doing are quite unknown outside Spain. So very few people know that 3 out of 5 flights in the world use Spanish software for landing, for example, or that 13 out of the 15 major oil and gas companies here in the States use Spanish management systems. And for example, now that we had the Olympics example last week, all the Olympics IT systems have been managed from Spain since Barcelona 1992, and the contract runs till London 2012. And it's not the case of a company which came to Spain with this project. IBM started the project in 1992. Now Atos Origin, the French provider, is the one doing it. So it's, and they do have a permanent team there in Barcelona, over 250 people working there on this. So if we had to choose in which sectors ICT or ICT development in Spain is pushing strong, we'd be speaking of the sectors down there. So the telco industry is relying a lot on IT systems made from Spain. The banking systems, I mean, and everyone has recently heard about BBVA or Santander. Not just the activities they are doing in their own business, but the productivity, the increase on their productivity because of the investment they have done in IT systems. Or in retail, for example, Zara, yet again, it's not about their clothes, it's about the IT use they made in their companies. So just to emphasize that it's possible today to establish a company almost anywhere in Spain. Just an example of the centers of excellence and software factories already established in Spain. We're speaking here of over 80 centers all around Spain. Although most of these companies established or made their first establishment in Madrid or Barcelona, they are all opening their network, trying to capture all the qualified workers all around the country. So for example, before we spoke about IBM, so IBM, the reason why they opened the center in Salamanca is because they have their excellence center with Iberdrola, just focusing on renewable energies. So this is the case of most of these centers of excellence. They are trying to capture value and to capture qualified people in every region. So we received this last week, and it's quite interesting. This graph is from a report from Forrester. So they are surveying now over 155 multinationals all around the world, and they asked them where they had people working on IT for them. No matter if they were working in captive centers, in outsourced providers. So unsurprisingly, India, which is the first one, almost over 63% of the companies said that they had people in India. But if you take a look at Spain, is with China, with almost 20%, we are the third one. The second one there is the whole Eastern European countries. So we are not speaking of a sector of future probabilities. We are saying that most of the companies are already working in Spain in this sector. So one of the main reasons we have this strong sector is human resources. We saw this data before in Javier's presentation in another form. So in the vertical axis, what we have is the number of people within active age with a human resources with a background in science and technology. On the horizontal axis, you have the ratio against population, and the size of the bubble is the population. So what I want to clear with this, what I want to say with this is not only that we have a big amount of people with these resources, but may scarcity come in the future, we are one of the countries better prepared to cope with it. So if you remember before, Germany, France, the UK were the first markets. Italy here was the fourth one. So that's one of the reasons why Italy is not growing now. They don't have the availability of human resources they need to grow the market. So Spain, we are expected to push hard because of this human resources part. If we ask ourselves where these people are coming, we have currently a network of 74 universities. As you can see on the map, almost every region has a university focusing on IT or telco. We have currently over 345,000 students on engineering, undertaking engineering on technical studies, and the output is around 33.9 thousand a year. So for any company establishing themselves in Spain, it's pretty easy to find qualified profiles almost anywhere in the country. Although Madrid and Barcelona still, they do have the biggest amount, so depending on the project, how big it is. There are some reasons to go there, but it's possible to go almost anywhere in the country.